Welcome everybody to our latest event. And I'd just like to thank Adam and Anna for joining us. Really appreciate it, especially at a time where the news agenda is, I'd say, pretty much out of control. So I'm sure your day jobs are pretty hectic. So thank you so much. And to the audience, for us, really focusing on quality media as we have here is really important, but especially in the regions. For me, regional sort of broadcast is the best way to mobilise a local audience, as I'm sure Sarah and Adam and Anna will sort of take you through. And one of the things I always find amazing when you look at the data of local media, local broadcast, is that people assume sort of the big nationals have a monopoly over listenerships. But if you then break it down by your cities, your Newcastles, your Manchesters, your Leedses, your Londons, the big stations are your local stations. Now, those local stations may be big organizations, but it's the local media rather than your BBC Radio 5 Lives or your Radio 4s, etc., that in those areas people are listening to. So hopefully today you'll see, the real power of local radio and local TV. Just as I suppose a bit of housekeeping, obviously we'll be taking questions later on. Do get your questions in on Twitter. And if you joined our event last month, we're running a bit of a competition under our Broadcast for Good initiative, which means anybody that tweets a question to our panelists in either of our January, February or March events will go into basically a free draw for a free campaign for a charity. So do get your questions in today. And also, as a reminder, with our Broadcast for Good initiative, clients are now basically getting a Broadcast for Good token. So every time they do a campaign with us, you get a token, and for every 3 tokens you get, again, you will get a free campaign to run for either your charity of choice or a client of your choice, that's in the charity sector. So do get your questions in. On that note, I will hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you so much for joining us this morning, Adam and Anna. I think just to kick us off, it would be really good if both of you could give us a little bit of an overview in your role and what you both do. So, Anna, do you want to start us off?
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Anna Youssef. I'm a reporter at ITV Granada Reports. I'm a self-shooter, which means I just tend to go out, shoot my own material, laptop send. I've also been a programme producer for many years, and I produce Granada Reports, and I produce the politics programme, the Granada Debate. Granada Reports has about 500,000 viewers every night. In 2020, we averaged a 27% audience share at 6 p.m. So we know that there is a massive demand for news. People want to know what's happening in their area. And in fact, regional news is in the top 10 most watched daily programmes. So my boss told me to tell you that.
There's some great stats there, and we'll probably come back to them later. Adam, could you also just give us a bit of an overview of what you do at BBC Tees?
Yeah, no problem. So hello, everybody. I'm Adam Clarkson. I'm a journalist based at BBC Radio Tees. So I cover stories that affect people in sort of Teesside, County Durham, North Yorkshire. Throughout the pandemic, I've been presenting a series on BBC Sounds called Unusual Times, which is sort of exploring how the pandemic has affected different communities, different industries, different individuals. And that's given me scope to sort of do local stories that have then gone national, or sort of national stories that affect people in the Northeast as well. So that's what I've been doing for the sort of last year. I've barely been at Radio Tees, to be honest, especially since, we're not allowed into the offices and stuff. And as well as that, I've sort of been writing stuff for BBC News as well. So I can write articles for the Northeast Online team that sit in the sort of local indexes, but also write national stuff that goes onto the main news page or bbc.co.uk. And I produce social media content as well for sort of regional and national pages on occasion, and present the occasional radio show when someone's off sick and they've got no one else.
Not much then, not much.
Bits and bobs. Bits and bobs.
Great stuff. So I think what would be one of the main first things for us would be great to get into is what are some of the kind of issues that people in the north, both in your kind of respective regions, but more generally speaking, care about? So Anna, again, I don't know if we want to start with you in terms of taking us through what are those issues that your viewers really care about and really want to hear about?
Well, I think there's a huge range of issues, but people want to find out about the issues that are affecting their lives, that are affecting the lives of the people they love. How long are the waiting lists at their local hospitals? How long is it going to be before their dad gets vaccinated? And I think that's where regional news comes into their own, because national news, it's a broad picture, but we can really drill down into the issues and focus on them. And it's just things that directly affect people: health, education, the environment. How clean is the air around my kid's school? And of course, coronavirus has dominated the agenda, so that's something that we've followed at every step. So and it's reacting to the big stories of the day.
And would you say that's the same with the work that you do as well, Adam, that it's the same in terms of those are the issues that people care about and it's localizing it in that way?
Yeah, I think Anna's like pretty much nailed it there. I don't think there's a black and white list of, these are issues that people in the north care about, these are issues that people in the south care about. I don't think it exists in that sense. And if it does, I think the lines have become more blurred recently because, as Anna says, the news agenda has just been dominated by coronavirus, and it's so overwhelming and there's so much going on. This is a time where I think local and regional news, like Anna says, has really come into its own because people are cut off, people are isolated, they want to know what's happening in their communities, but as well, they want the big national stories about restrictions or the new rules. They want that broken down into the bits that affect them. So I think, in terms of this, what do people in the north care about? It's massive. But the big national stories as well are just as relevant to somebody in Middlesbrough as they are to somebody in London, to a degree, I would say.
So just staying on those topic of sort of national issues. So we have the likes of obviously Brexit, COVID-19 with its many kind of strings of how it's impacting different groups of people in lots of different ways. So taking a national story, how do you cover these national issues in your programme? And make them sort of regionalised? Whether is that taking a slightly different angle on it towards those issues that the people care about more, or is it having local voices? How do you do that, Anna?
I think you just have to make sure that we are rooted in the region. I want to speak to people, businesses, organisations that are based in the Northwest, and I think that's what regional news is about. And I want to hear from experts in our region as well, particularly with the coronavirus. We have got a wealth of expertise and people that medical in the medical area, scientific area that specialise in, and that's kind of getting hold of those voices and putting them on screen.
And would you say that's same with you, Adam, or do you take a slightly different approach?
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. And again, it's about taking the sort of national stories and picking out the bits that are interesting to the local audiences. So if you've got a national story, it's got to appeal to everybody. It's got to explain things to everybody. But if you're making something for Radio Tees, an outlet that has a local audience, you have to go deeper and you have to sort of tailor make it to these audiences. So let's say we're talking about Brexit. Again, let's say it's Hartlepool. What we'd need to do is look at, right, what are people in Hartlepool, what do they care about? What do they want to get from Brexit? Why did the majority of people vote to leave? What are local businesses saying? What has the MP said? What are we telling these people that they don't already know? It's picking out the things that are important to the specific community. So I'd say when you're doing something for local, it's a smaller audience than it would be if you were doing a national sort of piece, but it's sort of more engaged with the communities that you're putting this story out to. So it's just worth keeping those sort of things in mind when you're tailor making your stuff for a geographical area or a specific sort of community in the northwest, northeast, or wherever. And
just sort of along those same lines of thinking, Adam, obviously it's I imagine it's been a more challenging time for reporters to necessarily be able to go out and get stories and people's stories, simply because there's not as much movement. There's not as much going on in the local communities, in the sense of, you know, like active sort of daily life. So where, if you're looking to cover these issues, where are you kind of getting your stories from, and those people's stories? Is it kind of local Facebook groups? Have you had to rely more on social media and other forms than you would have done sort of pre-COVID? How's that kind of changed?
I would say, to a degree, finding stories is easier than it ever has been, or at least that's the way I've felt, because every charity, every organisation, every community has been affected by the pandemic, and it's raised different issues for them. The challenge has been sort of cutting through the noise and giving our audiences something that they're not getting from the sort of national outlets. So it's, how can we push these sorts of issues forwards, and how can we keep it interesting? I mean, we saw this when Brexit was sort of first in the news. It was constant. It was 24/7, and people did get sort of fatigued with the constant, relentless coverage. And I think there's, you know, as much as it's useful to know what's happening around you and what the restrictions are, I think that there's a risk that that same fatigue exists. So it's just, you know, what stories are we telling that's different from the sort of main news agenda? And in terms of finding the stories, it's, you know, as I say, everybody has been affected to a degree. So in that sense, it's quite easy. The Facebook groups have been really good. Have been really good in the last year, not just for us in terms of news gathering, but in terms of supporting their communities. These groups have become sort of pillars, you know, for the people around them. And that's to share the good things. It's to share the bad things. It's for people to stay connected, because we are so cut off and so isolated. I think people really want to know what's happening outside their house, on their streets and stuff. The only thing I would say with the Facebook groups is it's easy to forget they only represent you know, a certain portion of the community. You have to sort of log off and ring people up, or, you know, do your Zoom calls and stuff. But in terms of news, I don't think there's less news. I think it's just a case of finding stuff that's not everywhere already, that's new.
Yeah, and because I suppose you both mentioned, you know, talks about national news and how actually it is still these issues, but it's telling it in a way that the people within the North care about. What we've asked to sort of our last couple of commentators that we've had on is, obviously there's a sense of, with anything that's related to COVID, there's a little bit of a sense of people are being impacted in exactly the way that we would expect them to be, business or certain businesses are. And, you know, there's almost a bit of a cyclical kind of element to it, of kind of going into lockdown, coming out of lockdown, and the, you know, I mean, we're all quite hopeful that this is the last lockdown that we'll have to experience. But how do you tell those stories and sort of report that news differently each time, to make sure that actually your listeners and your viewers are still kind of engaged with the news you're delivering? I don't know, Anna, if you want to kind of tackle that one first.
I mean, I'm always looking for me, every story I do begins and ends with the people whose story we are telling. So I'm always looking for new faces, fresh voices, you know, different businesses, different organizations that we can focus on. Because I know, while it feels like we've all been on this kind of relentless treadmill, the longer it goes, the different issues that have been coming up, you know, for instance, mental health. I think that's going to be something that is an issue that we're really going to see come to the forefront. So, you know, as Adam said, there hasn't been a shortage of news. Just sometimes it can be like, you know, how can we tell that story? How can we get to some of these contributors? You know, I've been going out, I've been filming, following all the health and safety regulations and guidelines. But it's also when, you know, like Zoom, Skype, they've come into their own. And what's actually been really great is, by its nature, news is fast paced. And you know, we can often seem quite demanding to organizations and saying, you know, we need that response to be quicker. Well, what's happening now is I can reach out to people and we can do interviews on Skype, and within a couple of hours, it's on the telly. And so people don't have to carve, you know, an hour, 2 hours out of their schedule to be in a piece, and they're a lot more accessible. So that's been a real positive, Sarah.
And would you say that's the same with you, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. You're finding now that everybody's at home, you know, everybody's got time. Maybe they're still working, but you know, that like myself not commuting, that's an extra couple of hours at least that people sort of have. So whereas before it would be, can we arrange an interview? Could I come and see you? When do our diaries match up? You know, now it's a case of, yeah, send me a Zoom invite, let's get it done. So in that sense, it's been great. And the point Anna's made there is probably the most important. I think it's, and I think a lot of journalists like sometimes forget this. It's that every story we tell is about the individual. It's about their story. It's about their experiences. You know, we can have the data, the expert analysis that can help contextualize what this person's going through. But at the heart of it, it's what, you know, it's the human experience. And I think now more than ever, because it is such a universal thing, I think that's worth remembering in sort of everything we do. It's that, you know, human story, that real life experience.
Because yeah, you both obviously mentioned case studies and new, you know, Anna, you were talking about new faces and fresh voices. I suppose the question I would have is, what makes sort of a good speaker to both of you? And are there any particular sort of voices or businesses that you maybe think that actually haven't had that sort of space to talk about how COVID or how Brexit has been impacting them, that you would be really keen to speak to? Adam, I don't know if you want to kick off with that one first.
Yeah, well, a big part of why local radio exists is to better serve communities that the BBC deems, you know, sort of underrepresented and underserved. So we know that BBC approval ratings are generally lower in the Northeast than they are sort of the further south you go. People are looking at the news, and this is sort of national news more than local radio, obviously, but people are watching the telly or listening to the radio and thinking, this doesn't actually represent me. I can't relate to whoever's speaking. So there's a real focus from us to be hearing from authentic sort of local voices. It doesn't matter if you're a university educated person or a middle class job or whatever, or you're just some guy from the street. It makes no difference. You know, we just want to hear authentic local voices. But in terms of national as well, I think there's more of a demand. Demand might be too strong a word, but I think there's a bit of a push to amplify these sort of northern voices, because the national BBC, I can only sort of speak for them, are thinking, hang on, we're not doing so well in the north. We could maybe do with hearing more of these issues and hearing more of these voices. So what we're finding now is that the people we're speaking to all the time is just our sort of bread and butter. Producers down south on the stairs editors, ooh, that's authentic northern voice. Could we have a bit of that? And it's like, yeah, go for it. So I think there is this push. I mean, I don't want it to sound like a huge effort, because I don't think it is, but there is a sort of thing starting where we know that these northern voices are becoming more important to sort of national news, which I think is great for everybody around here.
I think that's such an interesting point, and maybe what a takeout would be then necessarily for people on this call who are tuning in at the moment is looking at sort of their spokespeople, but if, you know, charities and organisations who have case studies, who have local voices in the north, that they should be sort of utilising and you know, making them known to you guys at the moment. So I think that's a really interesting point, Adam, on kind of a national scale. So we've talked about kind of like the heavy stuff in terms of sort of COVID, and we've talked about obviously sort of the issues that the people in the north care about. But what do you find actually, and this, I suppose my question is both on sort of positive, light-hearted kind of news stories, uplifting news stories that have come through from COVID, but what do you find are the stories that actually get the most engagement with the audience that you may then tend to kind of stick with and do sort of you know, follow-ups on that? I don't know, Anna, if you want to take that one first.
I will do, I promise, but can I just hammer home another point here as well about how people, there's this kind of misconception that regional news and network news operate in splendid isolation. That isn't true. That's not good housekeeping. You know, we work very much in tandem. So there's lots of times where stories that have been in, you know, regional then appear on network news as well. So, you know, there's lots of conversations happening on the regional desk and the network desks between colleagues. So, you know, it's about getting, you know, double the money for, you know, and that's really what I want people to know, that it wouldn't be very savvy if we operated like that. So lots of the times you might see somebody on regional news and the same case study or expert then pops up on network. So I just think that's something that people need to be aware of. Anyway, back to the question you asked me, Sarah, which is about engagement.
Yeah, just which stories, and this can be, as I say, we were talking about the heavy stuff, but are there any kind of stories that you've done recently that have actually had really strong engagement from your audience and has kind of made you think, oh, actually, should we be, focusing more on these things? Or
there is no trouble whatsoever filling the top part of our program. Okay, we have got hard news aplenty at the moment. But what I think we all need is, in any program, when I'm producing, I'm always thinking about light and shade. You don't want somebody to just sit through 30 minutes of, heartbreak, devastation, and absolutely no hope. So, that's why there's an and finally in a piece, and we are craving out for some positive, good news as well. So I think, and actually that's been pretty hard to find at the moment, and it's what our viewers really do respond to, because of course they want to know about what's happening in their area. They want to know the facts. They want to know that that what's coming out there has been research they can trust, but they also don't want to be left at 6:30 eating their tea thinking, God, that was completely depressing. So we're really on the lookout for any positive news stories at the moment.
And would you say that's the same, Adam? And I know we've seen the sort of Make a Difference slot for the BBC regional radio network that's sort of started, I believe, as it was in the sort of midst of lockdown last year, and is still kind of continuing today. But would you say that's the same with you in terms of getting that balance between, as Anna quite nicely puts it, there's kind of light and shade?
Definitely, and I think it's way more important now than it ever has been before. A radio show is obviously quite different to like a news program on the telly, but again, it's the same sort of ethos, mixing that light and mixing that shade, because people need a break. And just as a sort of example for that, I remember a story I'd done last year for the podcast I was doing. It was quite early into lockdown, and it was just a thing I'd seen on a Facebook group I was part of. A couple's wedding had been cancelled. Both big fans of the Animal Crossing game for the Nintendo. He said to his fiance, "Come and join me online in this game." The family were all in the game. They did like a virtual wedding ceremony, just a little daft light thing. And I'd interviewed them for the podcast. I think I put something on Twitter that had gone sort of semi-viral. And then all of a sudden, BBC Instagram, oh, could you do us a cut for this? The BBC's technology program, Click, oh, could you do us a click for this? And I think it'd been seen by millions of people across the board, because it's so light and so nice. And I think people are desperate to try and spread a bit of positivity in a non-COVID sense. People need cheering up.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'd all agree with that. What I wanted to kind of ask you both about now is that so PRs are sometimes a little bit guilty of falling into the kind of London bubble way of thinking. So putting aside sort of COVID-19 sort of related stories and news, but when you're kind of sent sort of campaign news or a story that an organisation or a brand has done, and yeah, sometimes PRs can be a little bit, as I say, in this kind of bubble way of thinking when it comes to either the issues they're focusing on. And I just wondered if you could give us an example of stories that you've received that sort of typically reflect this way of thinking, or if you've ever received a story that you've gone, that's clearly not really meant for us in the north. So Anna, I don't know if you want to answer that one first.
Well, I may have received quite a few. Look, everybody's busy at the moment, and I know, I can kind of imagine somebody sort of sat at a desk thinking, listen, we've got to just blitz this, we've got to kind of just make sure we get the coverage, there's a lot of pressure from our clients, and I completely get that. But sometimes I think, if people took a less sort of scattergun approach to getting their press releases out there, they'd actually, reap more benefit from it. It's just little things like, make sure you get the name of the program right that you are trying to contact, because that's going to peeve people off. Okay. Also, make sure you know the area that the program covers geographically. Most programs these days, they will have websites, so you can get an idea of the sort of stories that they're after as well. There are so many organizations and businesses out there that have a wealth of talent. I was looking at the list that you sent me about the people that are on this call and going through it all, and it was just like a bit of a kind of Christmas list, because there wasn't one name on that list that I thought we couldn't do a story on, or wouldn't have an expert that we could use. So for me, it's kind of like, I just want to sort of urge people to think about the talent you have there, think about the projects you're working on, and and get them out there. Follow the news agenda. If there is something that you think that you are working on at the moment, pick up the phone and ring somebody. Or we're also accessible at the moment with Twitter, aren't we? So just get in touch, please. That doesn't sound like it, does it?
No. But just as a short follow on to that, then, is it useful for you at the moment having almost like as a bank, that sort of, if an organisation has a few different spokespeople, whether they're kind of national experts or they're experts from within the Northwest area, is that useful to share with you, just as a look, we've got these people who can comment on this? And
I have my contacts spreadsheets where I'll go and see, look, I'm looking at a particular topic, who can I go to? But I'm always looking to build on that, and I've really sort of encouraged people to say, Bob may always be the person that you put forward to do interviews, because Bob always does the TV interviews and he's really, really good at them. But how about, offering up Mike or Sarah or somebody else, and I know that people can be, reticent to do telly interviews, but the majority of the ones we're doing these days, they're pre-recorded, they're just like this, we're all used to speaking at screens, and it's a really good way for people to flex their muscles as well. And ease their way into doing it. So I'd really and I'm not sure if I'm allowed, this is not a plug, this is an opportunity, because next month I'm actually, ITV run quite regularly courses that encourage people kind of teaching confidence on camera skills, so that if I turn up and I put a camera in your face, it's not, people aren't kind of going to be backing away from it. So actually next month we're running one aimed at women, and we're looking at kind of people that are experts in their field, or if you work for charities or organizations. So if anybody's watching this and will be interested in taking part in the online session, which is free, then I'd love to hear from you. That was okay, wasn't it?
That was fine. But I was actually going to ask a follow-up to that question, on just on the experts, and then I'll put the question to you, Ed. We've talked about the important low voices of stories from like a case study perspective, but if you're wanting kind of commentators and experts, do they have to be from the Northwest region, or if they're just somebody who really knows their issue inside out, but they happen to be from, I don't know, like the Midlands, or they live in London, would you still be interested to hear from them?
I want somebody that is based in the Northwest, and I'm quite rigid on that.
Yeah. No, that's good to know. And Adam, sort of same question when it comes to sort of the kind of experts and the spokespeople that you're looking for. As I say, we know with the local voices, but if it's somebody who's like a commentator, or sometimes if they're a celebrity who's quite close to the story and is an ambassador and going to do that campaign, are you interested in hearing from them as well?
I'd say probably would be looking at each story on merit and looking at what else is around at the time. But the most important thing for me would be to think about why you're sending this story to local news or regional news. Is it just another email address on the list where you do that sort of blitz that Anna describes? That's fine. But I'd say really try and think about why you're approaching these outlets. Because look, if your client's wanting people to be engaged with an issue, let's say it's a charity who has a base in the Northwest or in the Northeast, who look after whatever, and people have been affected in a negative way, they're trying to raise awareness. If you go to a local outlet, let's say BBC Radio Tees, in a way, if you're looking for something like that, you might get more sort of bang for your buck, because let's say it's an important issue, you'll get a slot on the breakfast show, with your sort of case study or your spokesperson or whatever. But then next thing, you've got a phone-in discussion on the morning show, and you've got people engaging with this issue. And then from there, it's running in news bulletins. The online team have written an article using quotes from these people. National see it, it gets more promotion. So it's really sort of tailor making your campaigns and really thinking about what you're wanting to get out of sort of local and regional news, because as I sort of said before, it's a smaller audience, but in a way it's a more engaged audience, because these are people that live and sort of breathe the area and the issues that come with it. So it offering up a sort of CEO or a celebrity, for me personally, it's not much of a sell, especially if you've got, 6 or 7 items on the agenda already that have a strong local connection. The celebrity's just not going to cut through for me personally, unless it was, I don't know, your Bob Mortimers or whoever's from Borough, that sort of thing. But it all comes back to, what is that local link, and would people who listen to this station or watch this show be interested in this?
So rather than brands necessarily leaving regional media, and sort of specifically in this case, media in the north as a final resort, what should businesses, charities, brands be considering from the beginning if they're trying to target your your radio station? What would you say, Adam?
Again, it's pretty much the same answer as just there. It's thinking about, what is the local link here? Is this an issue that's going to resonate with people? Does the client have some sort of, is there any connection to this region? Because, the producers and the journalists who work on these shows have a job, and that's to serve local people, first and foremost. If their stories go national, that's great. But the sort of job description is, let's serve the people around us first. So that's what we've got in mind. So I would just say, try and have that in mind when you're putting stuff together. The CEO might be really great, but what might be even better would be somebody from that region who's connected with the charity, who has a real story, who can just chat on, who sounds like us in a way. I think that's quite an important thing as well. And this isn't to say that celebrity endorsement isn't good or the CEO offering isn't good, because they obviously are, but the sort of really hyper localized stuff will, I think, cut through a lot more when you've got these stressed out, busy producers trying to, get everything sorted for often the next day. That'd be my advice.
And would you sort of echo the same sort of advice, Anna, in terms of the considerations that organisations need to be thinking about at the beginning of a process if they're planning any activity, and how they can target the Northwest?
Yes, I mean, I just wanted to sort of clarify one point. For instance, if I'm doing a piece and the leading charity in that area, the HQ happens to be in London, and I would use like the CEO in that case if I felt that they were the best person for to be part of the piece. Sorry, what was it you were saying? Sorry, my brain.
What should organisations and brands be considering from the beginning if they're trying to target media in the Northwest?
Why should that person care? Why do I care? Why will the viewers? What's the connection? What's going to make somebody watching the programme actually sit down and look at the screen, as opposed to just carrying on cooking their fish fingers? And for instance, instead of offering up the CEO of the charity, how about you offer up somebody whose life has been improved immeasurably by that charity? And that personal story often just has so much more impact to the viewer, and it's actually a much easier sell.
And in terms of the kind of stories and guests that you're focusing on, either at the moment or sort of over the next few weeks and months, are there any particular kind of organisation? Well, what are the key issues that you're looking at in the sort of in the immediate future, and what kind of organisations and brands or like people are you interested in hearing from, Anna?
Well, of course, coronavirus is going to continue to dominate the agenda. We've got the elections that are coming up in May as well. We've got the budget. And then but you know, I think if anything, the last 12 months have shown, you know, you can't predict where the news agenda is going to go. You know, we're very much led by events and what's happening. So for me, it's, for instance, with the budget, you know, I'll be trying to find some different businesses that we haven't approached before, some different industries that we can try and reflect what's happening with them and how they are being affected by current events.
Are you able to give us a few examples of what those kinds of businesses are?
No.
Because obviously we've heard so much from kind of retail and hospitality, which is still important. So there's obviously still a need to hear from those kinds of businesses. But no, that's a good point in terms of any that we haven't heard from to get in touch. Would you say the same, Adam? Are there any kind of particular topics or, you know, issues that you're looking at for the short term? But also, I mean, I think we've mentioned sort of climate change as a 2021 issue a bit further down the line. Is there anything that you're kind of looking ahead to that you're going to be planning around?
I mean, this is going to sound like quite a sort of vague point, but I think it would depend on what the patch is. I think every area has its own sort of issues that sort of take precedence over maybe some of the more national stuff. I mean, if we look at Teesside, where I do the majority of my stuff, as an example, ridiculous levels of poverty, of childhood poverty. That's a huge one for the people that live here. And on the other side of that, you know, sort of drug use, drug-related deaths. Again, Teesside has a death rate that's the highest in England. So again, that's an issue that would matter more to us, or the people rather, that live in these communities, than it would, you know, somewhere else that doesn't have that same problem. So in terms of the pitching of stories and the issues and the businesses, it's thinking about, is there an issue, or is there something happening in this area that relates to this campaign? Or, you know, where would this campaign sit best? Is there anywhere in the country that's going through something that relates to what we're saying and stuff? But in terms of businesses, I think you make a great point there, that we've heard a lot from retail. We've heard a lot from these sort of same types of businesses. So I'd be sort of, me personally, if I'm putting something together, I'll sort of start at a more grassroots level, street level, you know, start trying to speak to these people that you maybe wouldn't see on the 6 o'clock news, or you're not hearing from, just because not these, actually, the independents, the sort of real life people. For me personally, that's always where I'd sort of start when looking for businesses or for stories as well.
And are there any kind of guests or commentators that you ever struggle to get on the programs that you work on? Sorry, Adam.
It would depend on the story. I think we struggle to get the Tories on more than anything else. You know, we've seen a lot of that now, even with the local MPs. I don't know if it's a sort of attack now, but we definitely struggle to get interviews with the MPs. So they seem a little more inaccessible than they maybe did in the past. But in terms of getting experts, in terms of getting, you know, CEOs or whatever, that's in a way, that's the easy part. The challenge, or the craft of putting an engaging piece together, is finding those real life stories and finding the relevant analysis and the relevant data that's going to help sort of help your audience make sense of what it is you're telling them.
Yeah, I'm going to come back on your data point after I've asked Anna the same question, because I think that would be quite an interesting one to chat about after this one. But yeah, Anna, is there, likewise for you, are there any kind of commentators that you sort of struggle to get on the programme, or any kind of types of spokespeople as well?
I think for us, the onus is to make sure that we are really reflecting the diversity and the broad demographic of our viewers. And if we don't, that failing is on us. But also, you know, when I now am approaching organisations, I will, you know, I might say, if they offer me a guy, I might say, well, have you got any women? You know, we need to be just a lot more aware of that. And maybe in the past, I might have been a little bit more reticent to ask that these days, because I can't just have a whole piece full of men. As much as, you know, I like guys, but we can't do that. So we have to be thinking, you know, are we reflecting our audience? And that's something that's really key.
Yeah, definitely. And now, just coming back to the point you made on sort of have what kind of local data and research you can get hold of, Adam, how kind of useful is research? And we talk, you know, we can talk about sort of consumer research that have stats for the Northeast, and from that to kind of data-driven insights a business might have about sort of your local area. Are they both quite useful, or what do you need necessarily from a research point of view?
Yeah, definitely useful in terms of anything. But again, it depends on the specific story. It depends what the stats are telling us. So let's say there's been some consumer research. 3 out of 5 people in the Northeast prefer salt and vinegar to cheese and onion, whatever. That might be a nice light thing on the breakfast show that they talk about. You know, radio loves this kind of thing. That's great. But if we've got stats that tell us, again, back to the drugs point I made, I do a lot of stories about drugs. Let's say we've got some new stats about referrals to youth services, and it's, what is that data telling us? So let's say it's the same as it was last year and the year before and the year before. Okay, there's nothing particularly new here. But if it's, wow, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of young people seeking help for cannabis use or coke or whatever it is, you know, that's just a sort of niche example. But if there's a big change and it's telling us something new, then that would be really interesting. So I think it depends on the story, and it also depends on what the data's telling us. Is it anything sort of new that pushes this sort of the story along?
And in terms of sort of the consumer research side of things, is there a minimum sample that you would take, or do you look at that in terms of you wouldn't take any research that's below a certain number?
It's funny because we get a lot of data sent through, which is the Northeast, but that includes Newcastle, it includes Gateshead, sort of where I am, all the way down to sort of Tees's patch. So sometimes the more local, the more broken down the data is, can be helpful, because then you're getting your bit on Radio Newcastle, Radio Sunderland, Radio Tees. So I think the producers really like things that are sort of broken down. The world can't operate around BBC local radio's geographical patches, can it? So I just think it's helpful the more broken down it is, because it gives producers a better scope of who they should be speaking to and who this affects, I would say.
And sort of, I imagine similar, Anna, in terms of having any kind of consumer research or sort of data-driven insights, it needs to be specifically for the Northwest, or is there a certain kind of sample size you need as well?
Well, stat can be very useful. From my perspective, it's like, how do you take those stats, that data, and turn it into telly? How do you turn it into a story? And you can't do that without the people, without the case studies. You know, I have this thing that I call the ST rule, which is it the best? Is it the first? Is it the biggest? You know, producers, we're quite simple creatures, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that top line. So
yeah, I like that. I think that's a good motto. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then I'm going to go to the questions that we've had in from the audience. So I suppose this is slightly more bringing it back to the basics, really, in terms of planning. Because obviously, you know, you referred to earlier, it's really difficult with the turbulence of the news agenda to necessarily plan too far in advance. But from sort of our point of view, how soon should people be getting in touch if, you know, let's say you're planning, you're looking ahead to the budget and they think they might have commentators or businesses, or you know, should they be getting in touch sort of weeks in advance, days in advance? When's best for that, Anna?
Look, there isn't a hard and fast rule with this. If you have an event that's coming up, or you know that there is an event in the news agenda, it's always incredibly helpful if somebody could send an email. And then if we are looking, you know, budget, we're looking for businesses, then we'll start storing those up, putting those on our databases, adding them into the news diary. We get hundreds of emails every day sent to our main inbox, and you know, unfortunately we can't answer every single one of them. So I can imagine, you know, people send emails and I think they just disappear off into the ether, and sometimes that might be the case. So but generally, you know, I'm going through the inbox, I'm trying to kind of garner as many things that we can follow up as possible. We have started doing a lot more pre-filming as well, which, you know, takes the pressure off us as a news team, and also means that we can plan a bit more in advance. But you know, the thing is, though, we're reacting to what's happening on any given day. So it could be, you know, you planned all these stories and then you've just got to rip everything up because we've got breaking news, and that can be frustrating if you know you're working with a business or organisation. So I would just say to people, look, be proactive. If you are convinced that this is a story that makes sense for that region, then, reach out. And then once you've made that connection with somebody in the newsroom, there are people now that, I've kind of randomly just followed up an email with now, and I know, look, I'll be able to find something from that person, and they're a really good contact. So it's just making a connection with somebody in the newsroom. I think that can really help as well.
And Adam, sort of same question in terms of how far in advance should people be getting in touch with you if they've got a story coming up, or if they've got commentators that can talk about a specific event?
Yeah, I'd say don't be too rigid with it, where, by the nature of what we do, we have to be as flexible as you can. So I would say there's no rule for that. Just let people know in advance, offer stuff up. And if your emails are getting lost, it sort of picks up on a point Anna made earlier about program names and stuff. Just go on Twitter, type in the name of the program or whatever, and it won't take you long to find a journalist who has the DMs open. Just connect with someone on a sort of one-on-one level, and then they sort of know what you're wanting to do. They can then take that to the newsroom and sort of plan on your behalf in a way, and offer people up on your behalf. So yeah, there's no rule. Sometimes I like to know something a week in advance. A lot of the time, the breakfast show, as an example, know stuff, a day in advance, hours in advance if it's like a breaking story. So I'd say just be, like Anna says, be proactive, message people. It's all about connection, innit? And then, your emails aren't going to get lost, and people are sort of bringing up your stuff in planning meetings, and that's the sort of best way to do it.
Building relationships with a key user. I'm going to go to some of the questions that we've already had in from the audience. So how do you feel is the best way to pitch branded research stories? Are they of interest to you, and what kind of regional angle do you look for? Adam, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, sure. And it touches on the points we've sort of discussed already. It's, what is that regional angle? Is it because the charity you're helping have a presence in this particular region, and in turn we're going to be able to speak to people who've been helped by the charity local to us, or have an issue? Is the sort of story relating to an issue that's massive in it? Like, let's say, is it a story relating to devolution? Does it have some relevance to the Metropolitan Mayor of the Tees Valley? Is it related to an issue is important to people in that part of the world? It's going back to step one and tailor making it for the outlet that you're sending it to. So I wouldn't say there's any sort of specifics other than, it has to have some sort of link to the audience that we're serving. But what, that could be anything. So just have a think about what the people care about in this part of the world, and how what you're sort of selling relates to that, and you think will connect with people. And the sort of, once you've sent that in, the producers will do the rest.
Anna, I'm going to ask this one to you that we've had in. What industries or sectors do you think need to up their game in terms of talking to the regions?
That's a really difficult one. It's just, I wouldn't say there are any specific, organizations. You have some people that are incredibly proactive. I think the biggest issue for me is time, and the fact that because we're a daily news program, I can't kind of, if I know one particular organization is more accessible and they're going to turn things around quicker and are going to get me that interviewee quicker, then I'm going to approach that organization.
Adam, I'm going to ask this one to you, as it seems more related to the BBC. Although there are sort of regional journalists, how do you advise we connect with their national counterparts best? I know you talked about, obviously, if there's a story that's of interest for your BBC Tees, and then it gets picked up nationally, so it might be within the kind of same thread as we were talking earlier. Can you give any advice on this, on how they go about this?
Again, it's connection with people. I think people want journalists generally want their stories to go as far as possible, and will work to do so if it's of interest. But it's pitching just to an individual, I would say, rather than an outlet. That's probably the most important thing for me. And look, if you've pitched something too local, they'll sort of take that pressure off you, and they'll do the rest, and it could end up national. But obviously there's that guarantee's not there. So if you're wanting to pitch stuff to national, then you've got to be doing that as well. But to bring up a point Anna made earlier, which I think is really important, it's that local doesn't work completely in isolation. You know, sometimes there's maybe not as much communication as we might like, but there is that communication and there's resources there and the sort of infrastructure there for stories to travel, both national down to local, local over to national. So that's something I think newsrooms are very conscious of and are thinking about. So if you can connect with an individual, I would say they're probably going to be thinking about feeding these stories around, which it maybe takes the pressure off you and helps the client out in turn.
And Anna, we've had a question here around B-roll content. How would you recommend PRs make good use of B-roll content? Should audio and video be captured for events? And how do you feel about sort of quality audio captured on iPhones? I mean, I know we've spoken about sort of having to do everything on Zoom and Skype, but is that the same for B-roll still?
I love me some B-roll. I love me some B-roll. It's like, yes, it's like manna from, especially at the moment. So, you know, you're doing my job for me. It's incredibly useful. Yes, please, to audio as well. You know, we're not expecting this to be you know, beautifully shot and lit, but as long as I can see and hear what's going on, you know, everybody's a phone aficionado anyway, so yes, please, to B-roll, it makes a huge difference, and often that's what can elevate something from just a quick clip into a package.
And this might be a better one for you as well. With regional news teams being constricted with sort of time pressures and working from home, what's the best way to contact news teams or planners?
Email. So go and use the general email address for that newsroom. So in our case, it's granada.reports@itv.com. And because there'll always be somebody that's sat across that. And also, you know, what I've done in the past is if I know I'm doing a particular story, I will go and I'll search through our emails and I'll just trawl through, and I may bring up emails that were sent months ago. So for me, it's a goodie box of content, of contacts.
And we've got one here because we've got a few charities on listening to this. How can charities get awareness weeks or specific charity dates covered if they don't necessarily have any new stats or data to share with them? And I don't know if you want to answer that one again, and then we'll come to Adam as well.
Again, it's about the story. I don't get fixated about awareness weeks. I think I used to when I was more on the planning desk, because it was kind of like, you know, okay, we're going to do something on this day, because for instance, I've recently filmed a piece about the rise in the number of people suffering from fibromyalgia. Now, fibromyalgia week or awareness week isn't until May, I think, but we're going to be mavericks, and we're going to run the piece this week or next week. And that's because the people in the piece are absolutely brilliant. They're fantastic talkers. And this is a condition that affects 1 in 20 people. So there's an interest out there. So don't get too fixated about waiting a whole year until you feel that you can approach us. Because if you have somebody that can speak for your organization or has a story that they want to share that's really powerful and very emotive, get in touch, because that's what we're looking for.
Another question we've had to put this one to you, Adam. Post-COVID, do you think, well, whatever post-COVID, when and what that will look like, do you think journalists will still use Zoom in exactly the same way they are now?
I reckon so. I don't think there's going to be any, I mean, we can't do deployments at the minute where I work. So I think I've been out to report physically twice since the start of the pandemic, but I've had a lot of sort of exclusives that have gone national. I've done a lot of sort of journalism, and I think that's the same across the board. So I think people are starting to realise across our sector, but across, you know, everyone who has an office, home working's fine, and we're probably going to keep doing it for a while, I would reckon. So I don't think there's going to be any sort of cut-off point where it's, sorry, we're not using Zoom anymore, come and meet us. I think this is going to be integrated into the way we work, and it's going to become just another, you know, resource that we use. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we'll continue to use it because it has, you know, we've used it through necessity, but it does have its sort of advantages, which I think really benefit us.
And I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Anna, or same as what Adam was saying.
For me, Zoom has been incredibly helpful, but does it does it fill the gap for actually going and meeting somebody and filming with somebody and doing interviews, and actually, as pleasurable as this has been, you know, it's like talking to somebody, seeing their whites of their eyes, making that connection, and it's no substitute for that. You know, it has been incredibly helpful. So I think, yes, we will continue using it, but a whole half-hour program of Zooms will be quite tough on the eyes. So, yes.
Great stuff. And we've had a question from Rob Devi, who apparently used to work with you, Anna, but he's asked you, we talked about briefly earlier, importance of spokesperson diversity in terms of gender. Is this the same sort of focus in terms of ethnicity as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Rob, by the way. Poor guy, he had to suffer sitting next to me at our local paper for many, many years. So if you can cope with that, you know, he's used to talking at him. So hi, Rob. Yes, absolutely. You know, it's making sure we reflect, you know, a diverse range of genders, ethnicities. Yeah, there's a huge focus on that, and we'd be doing our views a disservice if that wasn't the case.
And we've had a question here around because obviously we talked about positive and uplifting you know, news stories. When would a soft news story become less relevant to you? You know, a story that you receive. Adam, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Which sort of story would be less relevant, or when would it become?
Yeah, when would it be? Yeah, what sort of, even if it's a softer uplifting story that comes to you, I suppose the reverse of that question is, when would you take it if it's sort of a generic kind of one that would just be sent out everywhere, or does it still have to have that local uplifting element? I think is the question they're probably trying to, the distinction they're probably trying to determine.
So the light stuff, and I know we discussed this earlier, it's good to have light stuff in the bag because we are driven by the news agenda. Dominic Cummings drives to Barnard Castle. Oh shit, there goes a load of stories we were going to do. Now it's all about this. So we are, you know, dictated by what's in the national news agenda, but we still need those light moments. We need them every day. We need them all the time. So it's great. It's really good to have some time sensitive stories sort of in the bag, ready to go, that we know are going to be nice and are going to cheer people up, but aren't tied to a day or an event or something in the news. So any time is good. I'm pretty sure producers would be biting your hands off just to sort of make that connection and pursue that story, because you know, we need the light stuff, and it's great to have.
I'm going to ask the final question now. It's one to you, Anna, that we've had from the audience. Are you interested in any transgender stories or spokespeople based in the Northwest, of course?
Absolutely. I was going to say there's something in the woods, but absolutely, yes. You know, so please, and you have my contact details. Strike my email now. I'm really
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us this morning. That was a really great discussion. I think we've all, you know, going to go away with some really, really good food for thought, really, in terms of how brands and organisations that have joined the call can sort of work with you guys much more closely in the future. So thank you so much for your time.